Hello there. Thank you for joining us today as part of Nufarm's virtual learning series. I'm Bethany Allison, Customer and Brand Marketing Manager for Nufarm. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Dan Beran, Nufarm's Technical Services Director, as he takes us through the product review and technical summary of CHAMP WG.
Thanks, Bethany. Again, my name is Dan Beran. I'm the Technical Service Director for Nufarm on their crop protection business. And today I'm going to be talking about CHAMP WG, one of our key copper products for disease control in a wide range of crops. So CHAMP WG, as with our other CHAMP fungicides or bactericides, these are all built on a copper hydroxide base. It's a very readily available form of copper that's found its way into a lot of different uses in a lot of different crops. Now, one thing that's unique about CHAMP WG, this is our highest loading of copper hydroxide in our lineups at 77%. Now, when we talk about that 77% of copper hydroxide, it's important to remember what's really key is that MCE, the metallic copper equivalent. And so that's really delivering the active ingredient. It's a measure of the true copper ions that are going to be available for release for controlling diseases. So with CHAMP WG, that 77% of copper hydroxide converts to 50% metallic copper equivalent. So a 1 pound rate of CHAMP WG is going to deliver a half a pound of metallic copper ions. Again, that's the active ingredient that needs to be released to control bacteria as well as fungal spores. So one of the things about this formulation, obviously it's a water dispersible granule with good handling characteristics, and it's really designed for markets that need that high copper loading. And when we look at the traditional CHAMP WG use patterns, these are mainly in a lot of the tree crops, traditional copper markets that have been using copper for many years and often are using high use rates. And we think about things like citrus that have higher use rates, multiple applications for a variety of diseases, as well as apples and other tree crops that will often have a dormant season or a pre-bud break application pattern that often have much higher use rates, and thus the CHAMP WG high loading comes in very handy in those situations. Another nice benefit around the WG formulation is that this is approved and OMRI listed for organic production, as well as by the state of Washington's Department of Agriculture, who also does some certification around organic production for their state. So a nice product. It fits many crops, and it also, like I said, has the organic use patterns. So when we take a look at CHAMP WG, and I sampled just a handful of the crops and pests that are controlled. Really, this is why the coppers are so popular and continue to be popular products, is because of the wide range of cropping flexibility. And they're one of the few products that are available for controlling many of the bacterial diseases. And you'll see both bacterial diseases as well as fungal diseases listed here. And one of the things that copper also brings to managers in these specialty crops is fungicide or bactericide mode of action that has multi-site, and it also plays a role in maybe balancing out some of the synthetic fungicides as far as providing resistance management. So the copper products in CHAMP WG that we're showing here today really have a lot of uses in some really specialized cropping systems. So just to touch on a few of them, and this is just a small sampling of what CHAMP WG is labeled on. In grape, you tend to think of copper being an effective and historical use on downy and powdery mildew. It has a label for hops, many of the berries. What's interesting too is you think of the field crops, many of those are being managed with more of the synthetic fungicides. But again, CHAMP WG has that OMRI organic certification. So for land managers and retailers who might be supporting some organic acres, having this product available for organic production can really be important, whether it be on organic wheat or some of the others as well in the field crop situation. Now, when we look at the tree crops, when you think of copper, many situations you're thinking of the traditional bacterial diseases, especially in apple and pear, you're a lot of times using copper for fire blight as well as others. Citrus has historically been a large copper user as well. It's labeled for canker suppression as well as a handful of other diseases. And again, in vegetable production, that OMRI certification comes in important for a lot of producers, and you'll see a wide range of vegetable crops, again, with Champ WG labeled for many of the bacterial blights as well as certain fungal diseases like downy mildew and early blight and late blight in tomato. So let's take a look just quickly at some of the use rate ranges by crop. And again, all of these are derived on the label, and that's where we go for the ultimate details on all of these. But I did want to provide a quick overview of the rate ranges that are out there. So on these berries, vines, hops, we're traditionally in that 1 to 3, maybe all the way up to 6 pounds use rate per acre for grape. And also, one of the things you'll notice as you go through the label is each of these crops will have a maximum amount that can be used per season. Over on the field crop side, our use rates are maybe a little bit less. You're generally dealing with annual crops there and looking for quicker disease control, not necessarily long-term sorts of things like you might be doing in grapes or tree crops. And the other thing, again, like I mentioned previously, is that the coppers can be really successfully used in crops that maybe are traditionally relying on some synthetic chemistries, but you can use the coppers to provide an alternative mode of action or even tank mix in many situations, especially on something like sugar beet that often has many applications, tank mixes for Cercospora leaf spot. Now, over in the tree market, again, this is really where Champ WG has found a lot of use, a lot of historical use, and continued success. And you'll notice on the rate ranges in the tree crops, it's a wide range, and in general, a much higher use rate. And I'll point out on apple, you'll see a wide use rate range, and I'll touch a little bit about that on when we talk about a specific disease, fire blight. But you'll see generally higher use rates in the tree crops. A lot of times those are driven by dormant applications. On the vegetable crop side, we're back into some of those lower use rate ranges. And also just something to point out as you look at across the label on a crop like tomato, there are use rates that are driven by kind of the end use product. So for tomato, you can use up to 3.2 pounds per acre for the fresh market versus a 1 pound per acre use rate in tomatoes that are going to end up being in the processing market. So I talked about apples and the tree crops being really historical uses for Champ WG and coppers in general. And one of the examples of diseases where copper has been really important is on fire blight management. So let's talk a little bit about fire blight in apples. It's caused by a bacterium, Erwinia, that infects early on in the season through the blooms and through new shoots. It needs, tender vegetation to enter into the tree. But once it does, it starts to create shoot blights and even stem cankers well down the stem and into the trunk. And it's a really difficult disease to manage. Again, it's a bacteria, so there's not a lot of tools to manage this really problematic disease in crops like apples and pears. So let's talk a little bit about what the management program would be using Champ WG. So the first application would be directed at an early time frame at a rate range of around 8 to 12 pounds per acre. And the timing is really critical. It would be between silver tip and green tip. And there's a couple of pictures here that kind of illustrate what those look like as the bud is just starting to grow in the spring. It takes on this silver look, and then as the green starts to expose its way through the tip, it is referred to obviously as the green tip. And so this would be a time kind of right before the disease, the bacterial spores start to land and create further infection, is when you would want to have the copper in place with the copper ions releasing and able to control or suppress the progression of the bacterial disease. Now, one of the things you'll notice on the label for coppers is that after about 1/4 of an inch of green tip, the use rate recommendation for Champ WG drops down to 1 to 3 pounds. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, Copper ions, when they're releasing, can create some russeting on apples, and so you get some crop response. Again, a release of copper ions can do that a little bit. It's kind of one of the balancing acts of managing with copper. And so at this time frame, as you're getting a little bit closer to the blooms and the leaves fully coming out, you can have some russeting on the fruits. And so therefore, in most cases, this isn't recommended for the fresh market, but it could be used in a processing production for apples. So one of the things also you'll note on the label is that you can add lime at this later timing after the 1/4-inch green tip to reduce crop injury. And it gets back a little bit to how copper is releasing from that copper hydroxide base. A higher pH will slow the copper release. And just like I said, a rapid release of copper can cause some of the crop response and the russeting. A slower release can mitigate that to a certain degree. And that's also one of the reasons why, conversely, we don't want to mix Champ WG or other copper products with products that tend to lower the spray pH. So we want to avoid things that would drop the pH and create a rapid release of copper, especially on this timing, but also many other crops and use patterns as well. You really want to have these products releasing their copper as they're designed to with the formulations that they're in. So the traditional or kind of current fire blight management when using a product like Champ WG would be, apply during that silver tip stage and then come back to continue to manage the bacteria with something like a bactericide like Mica Shield or Agromycin 50 at about that 10 to 30%. So again, we're using copper plus an antibiotic, antibacterial to manage. So again, the copper brings in a different mode of action and helps with resistance management as well when it comes to an important disease like fire blight. So in summary, as we talked about here today, Champ WG is well suited for a lot of the traditional copper markets, and it's labeled for a wide range of crops. Champ WG is an established brand. It's been a successful product for Nufarm for many years, and we continue to see its use grow and continue to be used very successfully. Just from a handling standpoint, the product comes in your standard 20-pound bags. And again, don't forget that it also has that OMRI and Washington State organic certification. So it really has good flexibility. It's got the wide use ranges, wide number of crops, as well as the organic and traditional management practices available. Nufarm offers other newer formulations of copper technologies to complement Champ WG. We have Champ Ion, which is another dry product, as well as Champ Dry Prill, as well as Champ Formula 2 Flowable for those growers and applicators looking for a liquid product. So we've got a really well-rounded copper portfolio, and Champ WG certainly fits into the many wide uses for copper. So we'll have additional webinars around these other products. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or your local Nufarm rep, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks again.